Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver. Is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Welcome to the second week in September. We are discussing suicide awareness and prevention this month, and our series is entitled Hope Floats. Last week we discussed hope for the hopeless and strategies to instill hope in times of despair. And this week we are moving to what I'm entitling Heartache to Hope as we discuss one of the other risk factors for suicidal thoughts and behaviors, which is relationship stress. I know that I probably won't ever be able to get away from talking about relationships when I'm talking about mental wellness or mental illness, because relationships have the power to be something that is protective and helps us to be able to cope and gives us hope. And relationships can also be some of the reasons why we lose hope. So, relationship problems have been cited as one of the most significant risk factors by the CDC for suicidal behaviors and thoughts. And CDC identifies relationship risk factors as hurtful or harmful experiences that can include things like bullying, family or loved ones that have a history of suicide, loss of relationships, relationships that have a lot of conflict or are violent, or being socially isolated. And I want to kind of break all of these things down as we talk about some of the reasons why relationships can get us to a point where we experience that despair. And then, of course, I want to end with ways that we can have supportive and loving relationships that will allow us to be able to go from that heartache to hope. So I want to start by talking first about relationships that end, whether that's a divorce, a separation, a breakup. And so you all have probably at some point in your life experienced one, if not more than one, of those things. And I know that people often say, particularly when it comes to young people, that when they get in relationships and there's a breakup, someone doesn't feel the same way they do, something ends up happening in the relationship. Because a person is so young, they don't understand why it would have such a huge weight. But I want to talk to you about what love does, whether that is actual unconditional love or even conditional love or the facade of a loving relationship. One, what it does is it makes us feel like we're worthy, that we matter, that we have a safe space to land, that we are protected, that we are chosen, that someone picked us, thought enough about us, saw something in us that gives us some sense of meaning that we may not otherwise have outside of this loving relationship. And particularly romantic relationships, they tend to carry a lot of weight because we feel like our family members, for the most part, they're going to love us. They're going to love us the best way they know how, anyway. And so that is something that's going to happen sometimes by virtue of the fact that they're our family. But when other people choose to love us, when other people want to invest in us, when other people get excited about us, when they see us, and they make us feel so special, that carries a different kind of weight. Which is why when we experience things like a divorce, a separation, or a breakup, they hurt so bad. We put so much into that relationship. In addition to the meaning, it gives us a sense of identity. Now we are connected to someone. Now we have a partner. Now we have someone that we don't have to face things on our own by ourselves, someone that can walk in that journey with us. And so there's a lot of despair that happens when we no longer have that person. And that includes also the death, the loss of someone too. So when we are widowed or we're dating and we lose that partner, could be the illness, could be an accident, all kinds of things that could lead to that, or even a suicide. Then we're left very empty. And also what it can do is it can cause us a lot of financial distress. So if this person was a partner that I did things with, we had a home together, we were really taking care of each other, whether that's physically, financially, emotionally, and they're gone, then I don't have that anymore. So that can really shift me into a whole different state of being, because now I'm having to try to manage these things on my own. That can lead to homelessness, that can lead to debt, that can lead to a lot of challenges with even being able to support oneself and having to figure out how to be able to maintain when you don't have that person. But also, as we talk about divorces, separations, breakups, when there are children, the effect it has on the family dynamic. So I went from having this partner present and in the home, assisting me in co-parenting, and now that's different. That looks different. Particularly if it was a very painful, difficult divorce or separation. Maybe there was trust violated, there were harmful things done. Then we have this child who is caught up in the aftermath of that, or children. And we find ourselves trying to navigate these waters, particularly if they're very conflictual. So now a co-parent is talking about the other co-parent, making it difficulty when we're trying to set up visitation or have routine, establish a healthy dynamic to try to allow our kids to adjust. So then now characters are being attacked. Now I'm feeling this worthlessness. I'm feeling like I've lost a part of myself. And it can be a very significant struggle on people, to a point where sometimes it feels like it's relentless, it's not going to end. And so it isn't just a divorce, it isn't just a separation, it isn't just a breakup. It is literally a change in a lot of different aspects of our life. And that area by itself of the divorce, the separation, the breakup, is enough to spill over into all other areas: work, school. It can spill over again into church, whatever involvement you are in. We've seen very nasty divorces, separations, breakups play out in social media. Now people are taking sides. And now I've not only lost you, person, partner, I've lost all of the people that we were connected to as a couple, because sometimes when there's a divorce or a separation or a breakup, it includes the support system too, particularly if maybe these were more so your friends, or maybe they don't want to be involved, maybe they don't want to be connected. So now I've lost all of those things too. And that isolation, that loss, that hurt, that pain, sometimes the thinking that I won't be able to find love again. Um, Perhaps there are dynamics that occurred in the relationship that have caused me to feel like I'm no longer a viable partner. And so now I'm wondering, what would my life even look like when I don't have you, or that death or that loss? You're gone. I'm not going to get a love like you again. And so um, that hopelessness is what sets in when we have these dynamics in relationships. I want to switch over to abusive relationships, and these can be intimate partner relationships. These can be friendships. These can be family members. And when I talk about abusive relationships, I am not limiting it to violence, aggression. I am absolutely including verbal, financial, emotional, and sexual in this abuse. So we've talked a bit about this. I talk a lot about abusive relationships, particularly around domestic violence and assault awareness month with kids as well as with adults. Um, when you have someone who is constantly tearing you down, attacking you, uh, withholding love, withholding resources, um, withholding affection, isolating you from people, making you feel as if you are worthless, um, that you are useless, that no one would ever choose you, that this person is the only person who could really love you. And it makes you question a lot of reality too. I think a lot of times for people, these cognitive distortions that I talk a lot to you all about, those values that we end up forming, these thoughts that we end up creating about who we are, that guides our life, those core beliefs, if you will, they are altered significantly when we're in abusive relationships. That is where a lot of times the depression sets in, the anxiety sets in, We also may be in situations, particularly if a partner has wanted to control us, maybe we weren't able to have gainful employment. And so they're also controlling us by virtue of the fact that now it's been so long since I've worked that I'm really dependent on you. And so I need you for things. Maybe you have the car. Maybe since you're the only one working, you're the only one that has access to the bank account. I have to come to you for everything. Maybe you are the only person that I'm allowed to interact with because you're tracking me, want me to go and spend time with other people. You've cut me off from family, you've cut me off from friends, and your behavior has chased people away. So now I feel trapped. And I don't feel like I have any kind of confidence in myself or any confidence that I actually have skills, that I can do anything, that my abilities are there. And so that's again where we start seeing people trying to escape this reality. We see people getting numb, and you just feel like you're there. We've talked about previously when there is not a reason for you to exist. It can make it very difficult for you to want to get up every day, to want to go through this every day when you keep asking yourself, why am I here? Particularly if this is going to be my life. From that, I want to talk a little bit about bullying. Now, there is, I guess I want to say that there are different kind of perspectives about bullying itself as a risk factor for suicide. Some would argue that it is not the bullying itself, but that there are certain people who already have some other things going on. They've already got the depression. They've already got the anxiety. They already have a history of trauma. They've already been abused. So they have already risk factors in place that when the bullying occurs, it affects them on a different level. And which is why that some people can manage bullying different than other people. But there is also a camp of people that will say bullying is just like abuse. And so if you're in an abusive relationship and it can have these effects on you and cause you to have higher risk factors for suicide, then so can bullying, particularly when we see how bullying can really get to all kinds of levels. So now I can bully you on social media. I can bully you by calling you over and over and over again. I can send you text messages. They may come from an anonymous name or number, or you might know who I am, and I could be saying these mean things about you. I can now video you. I can take pictures of you. I can have you to a point where if you don't do what I do, then other people around you won't accept you either, right? So they don't want to be bullied, so they're siding with me, trying to avoid being bullied, and so they're attacking you as well. And so there's all of these kind of group dynamics that can go along with bullying as well, and particularly in cases where some, bullies don't leave a trail, a paper trail, if you will, and it's my word against your word. You may be believed over me. I just seem like I'm whining and complaining and I need to toughen up, and that I'm just overly sensitive, right? And so now I'm getting this rejection. Now I'm internalizing this message that I'm helpless, that it doesn't really matter what I do. Nothing is going to change for me. And also because bullying has that tendency to disconnect us from our social groups, right? Because again, especially when you're talking about school bullying, people want to be accepted and they don't want to be on the other side of the bullying. So they'll join in, right? So now I'm isolated because people have branded me a certain way. And so to engage with me would mean that you are going to now be isolated, and people aren't going to take that risk. But that bullying can also be in your job place. You might have a supervisor that's bullying you, because I do think it's important for us to talk about work relationships as well. That can be a risk factor. And I know a lot of you are saying, well, just quit your job. Why would you stay somewhere? well, maybe I'm not in a position to be able to quit this job, or I don't think I'm in a position to be able to quit this job. Because if we go back to the core beliefs, and I don't feel confident, I don't feel worthy, I don't feel like I have other options, I may have a supervisor who is telling me no one would hire me. They wouldn't write me a letter of recommendation. They're not going to allow me to be able to move up or move out of this department. They're going to keep me here, and I need to do what I'm told to do. Perhaps it may be tied to insurance. I need my insurance benefits. I might be going through some health issues or some mental health issues, or somebody in my family who's on my insurance may be. And so to switch jobs would interrupt their treatment. And so I'm not in a position to be able to do that. Maybe I'm limited in terms of where I can work, because maybe I have a criminal background that's limited my options. Maybe I have some educational challenges that have limited my options. Maybe I have a history of poor work performance that's limited my options. Maybe I haven't worked in a long period of time. And so I'm coming back to work, and so I don't really have the experience to be able to go other places. So any number of factors. And so now I have a supervisor who is bullying me at work, getting me to work longer hours, contacting me all outside of work hours, creating just a hostile work environment for me. And so again, feeling trapped, feeling isolated, feeling like no one's going to hear me. I hear a lot of people talk to me about that sometimes human resources isn't really a place where they feel safe and supported, and they don't feel like human resources is a place for them as an employee, but that it protects the employers. And so oftentimes people don't feel like they have really any a recourse, and if they do, then they're going to be targeted. There's going to be retaliation, and now I'm going to get fired. I can't get fired. I'm the only person that is supporting my family right now. If we don't have this income, then we won't be able to make it. Or my partner and I won't be able to make it on just their income, so I need to be able to work, right? And so then you end up feeling like sometimes I'm better to my family if I'm not here, because at least you can get my benefits, right? My death benefits. And so people start thinking about that, like, hey, I can get the family out of debt. I'm worth more to them dead than I am alive. And so all of these things kind of playing around in someone's head can really get them to a place of desperation. And so they're looking at options of suicide, or at, even if it's not suicidal behavior, it's some of those thoughts, the what if thoughts, that they find themselves wrestling with, which can also trigger um, depression as well. Then we have the familial risk factors. There has been some research done, and I know we will frequently say in this field, and it might be a little frustrating to people, that there isn't a single cause for things. And that is true. Um, More often than not, we can identify that there's a genetic component, that there's this social kind of learned component, if you will, um, that comes along with a lot of things, right? So we inherit some things and we learn some things. The same is true for our risk factors for suicide when we have a first degree biological relative who has completed suicide. So some people have a family history of having family members who have been hospitalized in inpatient psychiatric facilities, and a history of suicide attempts. We have people who have a familial history of suicide completion in their families. And what we have found is that anybody with a first degree biological relative that has experienced suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, or completed suicide has a higher likelihood that they will also experience suicidal ideation, right? Because we recognize that there are some things that are passed down. We don't fully understand all of the hows and the whys, but we know that there's a high correlation there. And so we recognize that's a factor. And that's going to be important because we need to know our psychiatric history. Now, what we also recognize is that often people who have suicide attempts, suicidal ideation, complete suicide, there was an underlying mental health disorder. So their psychiatric history is important because we need to know, was there a trauma history, was there a depression history, was there anxiety history, was there schizophrenia, was there bipolar disorder? That really is also what contributed to them completing suicide. Was there a substance abuse history, right? As we talk about the learning patterns, if I grow up in a home where someone is hopeless, where they feel helpless, beat down, defeated, isolated, as if their voice doesn't matter, as if they don't matter, and this is what I grew up in. We talked a lot about how we develop core beliefs, when we develop core beliefs. They begin in childhood. So I'm seeing a person, maybe they were in bed all the time, maybe they tried a lot of different treatment options and they just didn't seem to work, couldn't get the depression managed. Maybe they tried a lot of treatment options and they saw some improvement, but then all of a sudden they started sliding back and they haven't been able to be better since. They've been in and out of hospitals, in and out of facilities, trying to figure out how to get them well, and they haven't, right? And so we talk about that chronic and persistent mental illness and how that affects a person. Not only can it cause physical health issues, but also we talk about, again, the hopelessness and this despair. And then, maybe I'm numbing, maybe I'm just trying to escape any way I can, avoidance-based behaviors. If I grow up in a home and I'm seeing that, I'm learning my coping mechanisms from that, and I'm learning my self-worth and how I view and think about life from this environment as well. So we see how that can have an impact. Okay, right, hope floats. So let me get to what do we do about these things, right? How do we protect ourselves when we know relationships, whether it's dating, romantic relationships, marriage, whether it is work relationships, friendships, familial relationships, that these things can be factors for why people may get to a point of considering suicide. So let's talk about the protective factors. All right, so internally, right, and this is important because in order for us to have hope, we need to recognize that we absolutely have the skill set or can acquire the skill set to be able to manage anything we're going to experience in our life. And that's why effective coping and problem solving skills is imperative. And I think frequently we wait until we've experienced something to try to develop coping skills, to try to understand how we can problem solve and manage things that are very difficult. And I will tell you that one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to start learning coping skills, to start learning problem solving skills in childhood. We understand that that foundation of when our core beliefs is developed, when we start to internalize things about our worth, our abilities, um, who we are, what gives us worth, who we're connected to, what we value, all of these things begin in childhood. And so that is the time where we really need to be working on how to manage with disappointment, how to manage when we get our feelings hurt, how to manage when we like someone and they don't like us back, how to manage when someone says something mean to us, how to manage that everybody isn't going to like us, how to manage when people are talking about me and saying disparaging things about me, right? So these are the things that are going to help us be able to manage and deal with people in life. There are absolutely mean people. Some people really just are mean. And they're mean for various reasons, but they are mean and it affects us. And so we have to be able to learn how to manage that so that it's not so crippling and we don't feel so helpless and hopeless when it happens. I also think it's important for us to recognize all of the reasons we have for living. And I know that we talk about like your worth isn't tied to what you do, your worth isn't tied to what you have, your worth isn't tied to you being in a relationship with someone. But we do recognize that it is important for me to connect to something, for me to have some purpose, for me to recognize the impact of me not being here on the world around me. And that can come from a cultural identity, that can come from a spiritual identity, that can come from a familial identity. It can come from any value systems we impart early on in our lives. And that's why those early development of how we think about the world, how we see the world, how we see ourselves in relation to the world is so important. That I recognize that I wouldn't want to cause harm to myself because I'm a gift, right? And so you don't destroy gifts. So whatever those things are, and every family is different, and I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. I think it's just important that we have multiple things because sometimes we'll attach to one thing and not another, right? I may not attach to like I'm a part of the earth, so hurting myself hurts the earth. That may not necessarily be the thing that does it for me, but I absolutely may attach to how hurtful it would be to the people that love me if I weren't here. right? And I also think that it's really important for us to have assertiveness training, for us to be able to speak how we feel, express ourselves, be able to manage conflict, be able to deal with difficult people, right? And so we internalize so many things, and in that internalizing, we shut down and we begin to believe these things, these negative things about ourselves, particularly if we've heard negative things about ourselves, and they become our truth. So it's really important for us to be able to recognize who we are is not a reflection of who someone says we are, right? And being able to speak up and tell people, I don't answer to that because that's not my name. Um, that may be true for you, but that doesn't make it true for me. That may be what you said, but that doesn't make it right, right? So being able to do these things allows us to be able to manage and cope when we're dealing with people who are attempting to tear us down for whatever reason, oftentimes to get control over us, but also that it ends up depleting us. And so how do we fill ourselves up? Fill ourselves up by being able to affirm who we are, right? So the affirmations are really important. And I know y'all get tired of me saying affirmations are important. But if you cannot see your value, then it is going to be very difficult for you to be able to fight those negative thoughts when they come and tell you that there's no reason for you to still be here. All right, so what are some of the relationship protective factors? I will tell you all the time that it is not just about having relationships, it is about having healthy relationships. And so I think for a lot of us, when we're looking at and thinking about relationships, we assume that because someone is our family, we assume because someone is our friend, we assume because someone is our partner, that that definitely means that they're going to be healthy. That's not the case, because we can pick unhealthy partners, we can pick unhealthy friends, and we can be born into unhealthy families, right? And so making sure that you are, I believe in chosen people that you choose to bring into your life, whether that's family, friends, partners who are able, capable of being loving, of being supportive, of being kind. And that doesn't mean that they're going to agree with everything that you say. And we need people that are going to call us out, and they do it in love, right? To hold us accountable. And this is where some of our values come from as well. But we have to have that support, and it can come from a lot of different ways. It can come from um, groups that we're a part of. It can come from church. It can come from clubs. It can come from neighbors. It can come from um, pen pals. There are a lot of different ways that you can get that support, but it is important that we are connected. We are really a interconnected kind of people, whether we're shy or we've had some people hurt us and we, are kind of a little uncertain. We want to be connected. We want to be valued. We want to be loved. We want to be appreciated. We want to be a part of things. And sometimes it's important for us to recognize, like if you grow up in a family where you didn't see healthy, and I will tell you that it's very difficult for you to sometimes know how to choose healthy if you've not seen healthy, that, first starting with healthy role models, what would that look like? What would a healthy, supportive relationship look like? In order for me to heal from this hurt, then that means I have to figure out what it was about this relationship that hurt me, right? And so for me to have the hope, that means I need to be able to know that it exists, right? So I know this wasn't it. I know that people aren't supposed to be talking to me like that, aren't supposed to be putting their hands on me like that, aren't supposed to be violating my boundaries in that way, violating my personal space in that way, right? So what does it look like on the other side? And sometimes you do have to look outside of your family. Sometimes you have to look outside of your immediate surroundings to be able to find that. Sometimes you may find that in posts that you see on social media or TV, and not the over romanticized ones where they pick you up off your feet, they swing you around, you kick out that back leg when they kiss you. But really, true, this person knows how to communicate in healthy ways. This person knows how to resolve conflict. They don't hold grudges. They're not withholding attention and affection. We're able to work through things. I feel heard. I feel seen. I feel valued, right? So that's what healthy looks like. Again, it doesn't mean people have to agree with me all the time, but I ought to know that I'm heard, and I should be able to understand when decisions are made, and not simply because someone is telling me and that's what they want me to believe. Um, Outside of kind of these supportive relationships, there are things in the community that I think can be really helpful for us. That is support groups. You will constantly hear me talk about find you a good support group, because your tribe may actually be a group of people who are overcoming a challenge similar to you. That could be a grief support group. That might be a divorce support group. That may be a singles ministry. That may end up being an organization focused on your healing, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can make those connections. And it is important for you also to make sure that you have, I'm going to get that plug in for therapy, that you have the good therapy resources in place, um, that you have the good crisis resources in place, that you have those support resources in place. Those might be in schools as well. They could be in all kinds of different institutions. And I think sometimes we don't realize, like, okay, that could be at my church. Okay, that could be over here, this organization that is advocates for people having healthy relationships might be where that support comes from. So I don't want you to limit yourselves to feel like the support has to look only one way, like, oh, this is my friend, this is my best friend kind of relationship. That's not always what support looks like. Oh, I can only go to my mom, only family is going to be there for you. That's not always what support looks like. And sometimes for us, we're trying to get people to love us that can't. We're trying to get support from people that have never supported us. We keep going to them being disappointed. So I encourage you to really think about, if you're finding yourself going to people and feeling rejected, then it may not be you that's the challenge. It may be the people that you're going to for support. And so I encourage people to diversify those support resources and limit the people who just aren't able to get that to you. That doesn't mean that you can't love them, but it does mean that maybe they aren't the best people for you to go to when you're going through things, if you find yourself feeling worse after you talk to them. I also will tell you that when we talk about kind of just the bully prevention and looking at just reducing availability of lethal means, right, for people to harm themselves. And this is why it's so important to understand whether or not somebody is feeling suicidal. Because when we talk about being able to go from heartache to hope, like, I need to make sure that the things around me are going to contribute to me having this positive environment. So if I know I'm not in a good place and I tend to use substances to cope, to numb, to avoid, right, then I might want to remove those from out of my environment. If I know that I tend to be impulsive when it comes to available things, I might want to remove those pills that are in the environment. Like, okay, let me go through, let me get the knives out, let me remove the weapons. And that's just in general, whenever anybody is not in a place where they're feeling a lot of hope, and their impulsivity, hopelessness, depression, those are some of the risk factors that can allow things like that to be more tempting, because again, I'm just trying to escape pain. So we want to make sure we do that. So I want to kind of get that plug in there. But then I want to talk about some of the bully prevention things. One of the things that I think is really important is when we talk about teaching resilience. What does that mean? Resilience means that every time I get knocked down, I get back up again. Every time I face an adversity, I'm able to see a solution in it. When there's a problem, I cannot focus as much on the problem as I do on the solution, right? Resilience is being able to recover. It does not mean that you're not going to go through things, because we're going to go through things in life. We're going to have heartache in life. Somebody's going to disappoint us. Somebody's not going to show up for us. Somebody's going to leave us. Um, somebody's going to abandon us. Somebody's going to dismiss us. Someone's not going to value us. But that resilience allows me to recognize I'm not going to stay here. It's going to be hard. At first, it's going to hurt. But I will get stronger. I will get better. I'll figure my way around it, right? And also that I need to be able um, to handle distress. So we talk about distress tolerance. And the reason we talk about distress tolerance is because sometimes people truly don't understand that they have to sit with that pain, that things are going to be uncomfortable at times. It's not going to be so uncomfortable you can't bear it, but what happens is if I never allow myself to experience the pain and the hurt and it pass, and I recognize I can get through it, then I'll always be afraid that the pain is going to stay there. So if you've ever had a wisdom tooth removed, you know that for some people, I think my son was like struggling for about 2 weeks with his. I think for me, it was several days. and it's like, oh my goodness, it's painful. You don't want to eat anything. Like you wake up, you're in pain. Every time this medication wears off, like you're in pain, and you're like, this is horrid. Nobody wants to live their life sucking through a straw, right? Like it's just these struggles that we're dealing with when we have these challenges. However, the gums heal, the pain subsides, come out of that. Some of us never allow the wounds to actually get scabs on them. We feel like when they're open, they're so painful, they're blistered, I can't sleep well, I'm struggling. And so I never get to the other side of that. It gets better and better and better over time, right? And so that's what's important as well. And I think just promoting mental wellness. A lot of times, bullying occurs because people don't understand what bullying is and why people bully. They don't have the ability to affirm themselves. They don't have the ability to be able to find joys. They don't have the ability to recognize that that's not personal. That's not about you. That's about what's going on with this other person. And so we have to have these mental wellness things in place. I need to know my worth and my value. I need to have an understanding of all of the ways that I'm able to pour into myself, because that means bullying doesn't affect me in the same way. When I have the distress tolerance, bullying doesn't affect me in the same way. When I'm able to be resilient, bullying doesn't affect me in the same way. When it loses its power, then I don't have that sense of helplessness. I'm not isolated because I already have a connection. And then I think on the other side of that, like we have to just be more apt to teach acceptance and tolerance. And I don't like the word tolerance for a lot of things, but I think in this scenario it fits because you're not going to like everything. You're not going to accept everything. Some things are going to feel like they're against your values, your moral code. It even may fall against scripture for you, but that doesn't mean that you have to demean it or belittle it or abuse it or degrade it, right? Like you can tolerate it. I can be in this space with something that isn't necessarily in alignment with what I would do, but I understand that you person um, are a person, and I'm going to treat you as such, right? And so in that instance, tolerate I will use, right? So we got to develop tolerance skills. We need to teach our young people tolerance skills and acceptance skills. We need to focus on anti-discrimination. When I'm able to see a person and see them and not what they're wearing and not who they like and who likes them, and then I'm much more apt to be able to not bully them. Because if I see them and I can recognize the humanity in us both, then I'm not going to be attacking you for your ethnicity or your gender or your sexual orientation, right? And we also want to create just positive and affirming environments. And truly, if you've ever had a heartache, a heartbreak, someone has just been mean to you, they've been awful to you, like the thing that really can make a difference for you is to be in a loving space, a space that reminds you of your worth and value, who you are. Um, that can make such a difference, right? Because that's where the hope comes from. Like, okay, this person was awful, or these group of people were awful, or today was awful, or this moment was awful. But every moment isn't awful. And here's these wonderful environments where I have this beauty, this love. And that's where the family support comes in, right? So we're talking about that genetic history and understanding the environments we grow up in and how they affect us. Um, Early interventions, particularly when we know we have a first degree biological relative with a long psychiatric history, may have not had a lot of success with treatment. They might have been treatment resistant, significant depression, suicide attempts, suicidal thoughts, or even people who completed suicide. We need to talk about it, and I know that we have a lot of shame about that, and so we keep that under the vest sometimes. Family members need to know that they have this risk factor, so we can early on begin to make sure that we have coping in place, stress management in place, building those resiliency factors, right? And so in the same way that I would not allow you to know that we have a family history of all of us wearing glasses, and I see you squinting and struggling, like I'm not going to wait until you're 15 to get your glasses. I'm going to make sure that you're able to get that intervention early, so I prevent you from ending up being in situations where you can't see and so you can't perform at your best, right? If I know there's heart issues in the family and I know that by the age 21, the men in our families end up experiencing cardiac issues, then I'm going to go ahead and have you start getting monitored. We're going to be checking you early on. We're going to watch your heart. We're going to put some preventative things in place. The same thing is true for a history of suicidal ideation, behavior, um, or attempts, right? Or even completion. We need to know that so we can arm our family members so that they're able to protect themselves. So, identifying healthy partners, ending unhealthy relationships, supportive relationships, learning healthy skills, knowing your family history. This is our hope in order for us to be able to handle the heartache. Okay? Be well.